Well, I don't know if it's necessarily non-compliance so much as a lack of understanding as to what needed to occur and why. And as far as an overreaction, it's beyond an overreaction. It is unlawful conduct.
As Reek said that afternoon, all he could think of at that moment, when he was being handcuffed, thrown on the floor, was what if he wasn't Tyreek Hill? Right? Unfortunately, a lot of black men in our country have lived that experience. I know you know that very well because you've represented many of them. And I guess that is the whole point of this, what he wants to bring attention to now with your help.
That's correct. The Dolphins, fortunately, they were able to intervene and help get him released. But I mean, let's face it, the average citizen, that's not what would have happened. What would have happened is that individual would have been in jail, injured, or dead. We've seen it many times, so it's not just pure speculation.
Is he planning, he being Tyreek, to sue the Miami-Dade Police Department or Officer Danny Torres, others? Is that part of the goal here with hiring you and this new team of representatives?
I think the reason that he hired the team was so that a proper set of eyes can really look at what happened here and what justice is going to look like and the best avenue to achieve it, but not just for himself, but for all people. These incidents keep happening time and time again. And again, fortunately, Tyreek lived through his experience and wasn't seriously injured in his experience. But there needs to be a change, and that change started with the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, but Congress just simply let it go. It is stalled time and time again in the Republican Congress. And, there's only going to be reform if there's a law that requires reform.
What do you mean by reform?
Well, policing is a profession, or so they say. But in what profession do you know that you can be suspended numerous times and returned to the street? In what profession do you know that you can, for instance, let's say you're a doctor and you kill somebody because you didn't do your job right? In what profession, what doctor do you know who would not be held liable? But that is what we have in policing. And in what profession do you know that there are no national standards by which to adhere or to measure oneself against? That is what we have in policing.
A couple more minutes here with Devon Jacob. He's a well-known civil rights attorney, now working with Tyreek Hill in his fight for police reform. Julius Collins, one of the other lawyers Reek hired in this effort, talked about the issue of police reform as we're talking about. What does that mean, though? We aren't going to see another Black Lives Matter movement or calls for defunding the police here. Is that what's going on?
Well, unfortunately, I think you're right. We're not going to have a massive push in the street or an uprising because, if that occurred, that's when people listen. I mean, sadly, we're going to be behind closed doors in Congress trying to push this through. But what does it look like? It looks like a national database where officers' conduct can be tracked. It looks like a removal of the defense of qualified immunity that is judicially made and provided to officers, the only profession with such a defense. It looks like national standards across the board to train law enforcement personnel to better protect them as well as the public, to ensure that everybody knows what's going to happen when you interact with the police. The average citizen doesn't understand why a window needs to be down, and the average citizen is not trusting of the police for good reason. It's the reasons that we see on the news all the time, almost daily. We're numb to it, and it needs to stop.
We can't get away from the issue of race here, right? Because, and I've talked about this in the past, been criticized for saying that I've never walked a foot in the shoes of a black man in our country, but you can't get away from that issue here. This is what you do for a living. How much of it is about race? Because I've had interactions with the cop. I've never had a negative one, but clearly that isn't the same for everybody.
I think race is one subset of the problem, and it ties right back to national standards and accountability and proper policies and supervision. But the overall issue is, if you don't have proper standards, you don't have proper supervision, then the mentally ill police officer can get on the street, the racist can get on the street, the out of control person who simply, is put there just because of friends and family gets on the street. This is about proper policing that adheres to the law for everybody. The problem right now is when officers put on the uniform, it doesn't matter what race they are blue government. That is their race at that point. And there's systemic problems that are being furthered time and time again and are ingrained in that uniform.
It would seem to me, and I don't have to tell you this, I'm sure you guys have already talked about that, if you really want to make a difference here, forget about Congress. They're a completely separate problem. You need law enforcement, respected law enforcement on your side, working with you to try and bring forward this change. Is that going to be part of the effort that you guys are trying to do?
Absolutely. There are hundreds, thousands of great officers out there. I used to be a police officer. I like to believe I was one of them. I work with, and in fact, I defended law enforcement for years. I work with law enforcement in these cases. The officers who want this to be a profession and want it to be a respected profession, they support this. They help us to further these changes because these changes protect them as well. They know that they're not going to be on the street with an officer who loses his mind and then escalates something, causing harm to everybody and possibly that officer.
Last thing for you, and especially because you used to be in law enforcement, what does it tell you that this cop, Danny Torres, but the other one that I thought was out of control as well, behaved like this, knowing that not only did they have body cameras on, knowing that this was happening in the middle of traffic with fans walking by, them being videotaped, everything they were doing, and they didn't seem to have either any self-awareness or any care at all that they were behaving this way. What does that tell you about the fact that they just did this?
You hit the nail right on the head. That is just like in the George Floyd incident. When officers as a group operate in this manner out in public, knowing that they're being recorded and watched by the public, and they truly believe that their behavior is acceptable, it reflects a systemic problem in the police department itself as far as their training, their supervision, and the culture there. And it's not just one officer. That is reflective of a system-wide problem.
Well, if better policing and organization on a national level is what you're seeking, you've got a friend in me, and happy to have you back on the show anytime you have something new to report. I really appreciate the time.
I appreciate you and reporting this. Thank you very much.
That's Devon Jacob, well-known civil rights attorney. He's now part of the team Tyreek Hill has hired in his fight for police reform.